Where are you going in that dress? The question left Alpha King Ethan Blackwood's mouth before he could stop it. The entire hallway seemed to pause. Servants carrying linens slowed their steps. A young footman nearly dropped a stack of records. Even the sunlight streaming through the palace windows felt frozen in place. Across the corridor stood Olivia Carter, staring at him with wide blue eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan immediately regretted the sharpness in his voice. Not because he felt embarrassed, because he did not understand why he had reacted that way in the first place. Olivia looked different today. That much was obvious. For 3 years, she had worked quietly inside Silver Moon Palace. Most days she wore simple, made uniforms in soft gray and navy colors. Practical clothes designed for long hours and endless responsibilities. Today was different. The dress she wore was elegant but modest. A soft blue fabric flowed gently to her ankles. The sleeves were neatly fitted. Small silver details caught the afternoon light. Nothing about it was extravagant. Yet somehow Ethan could not look away. The problem was not the dress itself. The problem was that for the first time, he was seeing Olivia as something other than part of the palace background. And he did not know what to do with that realization. Olivia recovered first. "I am attending a community celebration in town tonight, Your Majesty." Her voice remained polite, calm, professional, exactly as it always was. Ethan frowned slightly. "A celebration?" "Yes." "Since when?" The question sounded ridiculous the moment it escaped. Olivia blinked. "Since last month." Ethan crossed his arms. "I was not aware of that." A strange expression flashed across Olivia's face. Not anger, not sadness, something closer to disappointment. "There are many things you are not aware of, Your Majesty." The words were respectful, yet they landed harder than any criticism. Before Ethan could respond, Olivia lowered her gaze. "If you will excuse me, I should finish my duties before I leave." Then she walked away. The blue dress disappeared around the corner. Ethan remained standing exactly where he was. Irritation settled inside his chest. Not directed at Olivia, directed at himself. Why had he cared? Why had the sight of her leaving bothered him so much? Throughout the afternoon, he attempted to focus on royal business. Trade reports arrived from neighboring territories. Advisors requested signatures. Military captains delivered updates. Yet his concentration continued drifting. Every time he looked down at a document, an image appeared in his mind. Olivia smiling softly while adjusting the sleeve of that blue dress. Olivia standing in the sunlight near the hallway window. Olivia walking away without looking back. By evening, Ethan's patience was gone. "You have reread that page 4 times." The observation came from Henry Lawson, his oldest advisor. Ethan looked up. "What?" Henry pointed toward the report in front of him. "You have been staring at the same paragraph for 10 minutes. Ethan closed the folder. "Perhaps I am tired." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps." The advisor studied him carefully. "Or perhaps something else is distracting you." Ethan stood from his chair. "You spend too much time observing people." Henry smiled. "Occupational hazard." The Alpha King left before further questions could follow. He told himself he needed fresh air. Nothing more. The palace gardens stretched across several acres behind the main residence. Stone pathways wound through flowering trees and carefully maintained hedges. Normally, the peaceful atmosphere helped him think. Tonight, it only made him more aware of his own thoughts. As he walked, memories surfaced unexpectedly. Olivia carrying heavy books through the library during winter. Olivia staying late to help elderly servants finish tasks. Olivia quietly repairing decorations before important ceremonies. For years she had been there. Always present. Always reliable. Somehow he had never truly looked at her. Not really. The realization unsettled him. Near the edge of the garden, he stopped beside a fountain. Music drifted faintly from town beyond the palace walls. The celebration had already begun. Ethan imagined Olivia there, laughing, smiling, enjoying an evening away from palace duties. The image should not have bothered him. Yet it did, more than he wanted to admit. A strange heaviness settled inside his chest. Not anger, not frustration, something far more confusing. Then another thought arrived. What if someone else noticed her tonight? What if another man saw exactly what Ethan had suddenly begun noticing himself? The possibility created an immediate wave of discomfort. Ethan frowned. The reaction made no sense. Olivia was free to spend time with whoever she wished. She owed him nothing beyond her duties. So why did the idea leave him feeling unsettled? Above him, evening stars slowly appeared across the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond the palace gates, Olivia was attending a celebration he knew almost nothing about. And for the first time in years, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood realized there was someone inside his palace whose absence could completely disrupt his peace of mind. The celebration in town was far more beautiful than Olivia expected. Strings of lanterns hung between buildings, casting warm golden light across the streets. Musicians played cheerful melodies near the square, while families gathered around tables filled with food and laughter. For the first time in months, Olivia was not carrying trays, organizing schedules, or rushing through palace corridors. Tonight she was simply another guest enjoying the evening. The feeling was unfamiliar and surprisingly wonderful. She moved through the crowd with a quiet smile, occasionally stopping to greet familiar faces from town. Several merchants recognized her from palace errands. Elderly women she had helped during market visits waved warmly. Children ran through the square, carrying ribbons and flowers. The entire town seemed brighter than usual. Yet despite the joyful atmosphere, a small part of her thoughts remained trapped inside the palace hallway. Ethan's question continued echoing in her mind. She had spent years serving at Silvermoon Palace. During that time, the Alpha King had barely noticed her existence beyond professional duties. Then suddenly he had looked at her as though her evening plans somehow mattered. The memory confused her. More than that, it hurt a little, not because of what he asked, because of how he asked it, as though she needed permission to enjoy one evening for herself. Olivia pushed the thought aside and continued walking. She refused to allow palace frustrations to ruin the celebration. Near the center of the square stood a temporary stage decorated with flowers and lanterns. Local musicians performed while guests gathered nearby. That was when she spotted a familiar face. Nathan Reed smiled the moment he saw her. Olivia. His expression brightened immediately. You actually came. Olivia laughed softly. You sound surprised. I work in the royal library. I know how much responsibility the palace places on its staff. Nathan offered a playful shrug. I assumed they would find a way to keep you busy. Olivia smiled. Unlike many people, Nathan never treated her differently because she was an Omega Maid. He spoke to her with kindness and respect. That alone made his company refreshing. I almost stayed behind, she admitted. But I promised myself one evening away from work. Then I am glad you kept the promise. They spent the next hour exploring the celebration together. Nathan introduced her to several local historians. They listened to musicians. They sampled pastries from different vendors. Nothing extraordinary happened. Yet Olivia found herself genuinely enjoying the evening. More importantly, she felt seen. Not as a servant, not as background scenery, as a person. Meanwhile, many miles away inside Silvermoon Palace, Ethan stared at the same page of a report for the sixth time. The words blurred together meaninglessly. He finally pushed the document aside with a frustrated sigh. Still thinking about her? Henry asked from across the room. Ethan looked up sharply. Who? Henry's expression remained completely innocent. The maid. Silence followed. I did not say anything. You did not need to. Ethan stood and crossed toward the window. Beyond the palace grounds, distant lights from the celebration flickered beneath the night sky. This conversation is becoming annoying. Henry smiled knowingly. Then perhaps you should stop proving me correct. Ethan ignored him. Yet the comment lingered. Because the truth was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. He was thinking about Olivia. Constantly. The realization made no sense. She had worked in the palace for years. Why now? Why tonight? Why did the image of her smiling in that blue dress refuse to leave his mind? Before he could answer himself, another unpleasant thought arrived. She was not alone at the celebration. Someone could be talking with her right now, making her laugh, walking beside her beneath those lanterns. The idea instantly tightened something inside his chest. Ethan frowned deeply. The reaction felt irrational, yet it remained impossible to ignore. Back in town, Olivia and Nathan stopped beside a fountain illuminated by dozens of floating lights. Reflections danced across the water's surface. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nathan glanced toward her. You seem happier tonight. Olivia looked surprised. Do I? Yes. He smiled gently. You deserve more evenings like this. The simple kindness touched her more than she expected. For years, most people noticed what she could do for them. Very few noticed how she felt. As music drifted through the square, and lanterns glowed overhead, Olivia smiled softly, unaware that far away, inside a palace overlooking the valley, an alpha king stood at a window questioning emotions he had never expected to feel. And for the first time, the distance between them felt far greater than a few miles of road. The following morning arrived far too quickly for Ethan Blackwood. Despite spending most of the night attempting to convince himself that nothing unusual was happening, the moment he opened his eyes, the first thought that entered his mind was Olivia. Not council meetings, not border reports, not royal responsibilities. Olivia. The realization alone was enough to sour his mood. By breakfast, palace staff noticed the change immediately. Servants moved more carefully. Advisors chose their words more cautiously. Even Henry seemed unusually entertained by the situation. "You look tired," the older man observed while reviewing documents. Ethan barely glanced up. "I slept." "That was not my question." Ethan set down his coffee cup. "Do you enjoy making my life difficult?" Henry smiled. "Only when it is this obvious." Before Ethan could respond, another advisor entered with the day's schedule. Meetings, inspections, diplomatic correspondence, budget reviews. Normally such structure helped him focus. Today it only felt irritating. Every task seemed to take twice as long. Every conversation felt distracting. Around noon, he finally found himself walking through a familiar palace corridor. His pace slowed instinctively as he approached the West Wing. He told himself there was no reason for the detour. Yet somehow his feet had carried him there anyway. The hallway was empty. No sign of Olivia. A strange disappointment settled inside him. Then he heard laughter. Soft, genuine, coming from the nearby library entrance. Ethan turned. Through the open doorway, he spotted Olivia standing beside Nathan Reed. The librarian held several books while Olivia examined something written on a page. Both were smiling. Not formal smiles. Not polite smiles. Comfortable ones. The kind people shared when they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Ethan froze. An unfamiliar sensation immediately tightened inside his chest. Nathan pointed toward one of the books. Olivia laughed softly and shook her head. A loose strand of blonde hair slipped across her cheek. Nathan smiled and gently handed her a ribbon bookmark. The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet Ethan found himself watching far longer than necessary. Why was Nathan always nearby? The question appeared before he could stop it. More importantly, why did the answer suddenly matter so much? Olivia accepted the books and thanked him. Nathan responded with another warm smile. Then she turned and disappeared down the hallway, carrying the stack carefully in her arms. Ethan remained standing in place. Interesting. Henry's voice appeared behind him like a perfectly timed nightmare. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Go away. I merely observed that you seem unusually interested in library management these days." "I was passing by." Henry nodded solemnly. "Of course. Do not start." "I did not say anything." Ethan exhaled sharply. The worst part was that arguing only made him sound guilty. Throughout the remainder of the afternoon, the image refused to leave him alone. Olivia smiling at Nathan. Nathan smiling back. The ease between them. The comfort. By evening, Ethan had become thoroughly annoyed with himself. During dinner, he found his attention drifting repeatedly toward empty spaces where Olivia normally worked. She was not assigned to the royal dining room tonight. Yet her absence felt strangely noticeable. Eventually, he pushed away his plate and stepped onto a balcony overlooking the palace grounds. Cool evening air swept across the valley below. Lights twinkled throughout Silver Moon Kingdom. Normally, the view helped him clear his thoughts. Tonight, it only made him think harder. The uncomfortable truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Seeing Olivia with Nathan had bothered him. Not mildly. Not temporarily. Deeply. The realization unsettled him because he could not explain it. Nathan was respectable, intelligent, kind. If Olivia enjoyed spending time with him, that should have been perfectly reasonable. So why did the idea leave him feeling restless? Why did every smile she gave another man suddenly feel significant? Somewhere below, palace staff crossed the courtyard carrying supplies. Ethan leaned against the stone railing and stared toward the horizon. For years, Olivia had been part of his daily life without truly entering his thoughts. Now she occupied them constantly. Her smile, her voice, her kindness, her absence. Everything seemed different. And for the first time, a troubling possibility began forming in the back of his mind. Perhaps this was never about the dress. Perhaps it was never about the celebration. Perhaps the real problem was far simpler. Someone else had started noticing the woman Ethan himself had overlooked for far too long. And suddenly, he was not sure he liked that at all. The days that followed only made everything worse. Ethan tried to convince himself that his growing distraction would eventually disappear. He buried himself in royal duties. He scheduled additional meetings. He reviewed reports late into the evening. Yet no amount of work seemed capable of quieting his thoughts. Because everywhere he looked, reminders of Olivia appeared. A perfectly organized stack of correspondence reminded him of the way she arranged palace records. Fresh flowers in the council chamber reminded him that she quietly replaced them every week without being asked. Even simple things he had never noticed before, now carried her presence. The realization was becoming impossible to escape. One afternoon, Ethan entered the palace library searching for a historical treaty. Normally a servant would have retrieved it. Today he wanted an excuse to leave his office. The library remained peaceful as always. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. Rows of books stretched toward the vaulted ceiling. And near a reading table sat Olivia. She was not working. She was smiling. Across from her sat Nathan Reed. Several books lay open between them. Their conversation appeared relaxed and easy. Nathan pointed toward an illustration inside one of the volumes. Olivia laughed softly. The sound reached Ethan before either of them noticed him. For a brief moment, he simply stood there watching. Something about the scene bothered him far more than it should have. Olivia looked comfortable, happy, free from the endless responsibilities of palace work. She deserved that happiness. He knew she did. Yet seeing someone else provide it created a feeling he could no longer ignore. Nathan finally noticed him and stood immediately. "Your Majesty." Olivia looked up. Surprise crossed her face. "Your Majesty." Ethan nodded. "Am I interrupting?" Nathan smiled politely. "Not at all." The librarian glanced toward Olivia. "We were discussing local history archives." Ethan looked at the books, then at Olivia, then back at Nathan. "I see." Silence followed. An awkward silence. The kind that made everyone uncomfortable. Olivia shifted slightly in her chair. Ethan realized he had no reason for being there anymore. Yet leaving felt strangely difficult. "Enjoy your research," he finally said. Then he walked away. The moment he stepped outside the library, frustration washed over him. Not directed at Nathan. Not directed at Olivia. Directed entirely at himself. Because he knew exactly how ridiculous he was behaving. Hours later, the palace hosted a small reception for visiting community leaders. The event required servants, advisors, and administrative staff to assist throughout the evening. Olivia attended as part of the palace support team. Ethan noticed her almost immediately. Not because she stood out, because now he noticed her everywhere. Throughout the reception, she moved gracefully through the room helping guests, answering questions, and solving small problems before anyone else realized they existed. The more Ethan watched, the more he became aware of something troubling. Olivia had always done these things. She had always been thoughtful, always reliable, always kind. He simply had never paid attention. Across the room, an elderly guest accidentally dropped several documents. Before anyone else reacted, Olivia hurried forward and helped gather them. A few minutes later, she guided a confused visitor toward the correct meeting chamber. Then she quietly helped a nervous young servant recover from a mistake before anyone could embarrass him. One act of kindness after another. Small moments. Invisible moments. Yet suddenly Ethan saw them all. Henry appeared beside him carrying a glass of water. "You are staring again." Ethan sighed. "I am observing." "Of course." The older man smiled. "And what have you observed?" Ethan looked across the room toward Olivia. "That I have been blind." Henry's expression softened slightly. "Now that is an interesting answer." Ethan remained silent. Because for the first time, he was beginning to understand something uncomfortable. His attention was not changing because Olivia had changed. She was the same person she had always been. The difference was him. He was finally seeing her. Truly seeing her. Later that evening, as guests prepared to leave, Ethan noticed Nathan approach Olivia once more. The librarian handed her a small wrapped package. Nothing expensive. Nothing dramatic. Olivia looked surprised. Then she smiled warmly and thanked him. The simple exchange lasted only seconds. Yet Ethan felt that familiar tightening in his chest return. This time, however, he did not try to deny it. Standing beneath the glow of palace chandeliers, Watching another man make Olivia smile, Ethan finally admitted the truth to himself. The discomfort was not irritation. It was not protectiveness. It was not curiosity. It was jealousy. And the realization terrified him far more than he wanted to admit. The morning after the reception felt strangely quiet. Ethan sat alone in his office long before sunrise, staring at the valley beyond his windows while the rest of the palace still slept. The previous evening continued replaying inside his mind. Olivia smiling at Nathan. The small gift. The comfortable conversations. The effortless connection between them. For once, Ethan stopped trying to dismiss the emotions. Denial was becoming impossible. He was jealous. The realization should have brought clarity. Instead, it created even more questions. What exactly was he jealous of? Nathan's attention? Olivia's smile? The possibility that someone else occupied a place in her life that Ethan suddenly wished belonged to him? None of the answers were comfortable. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Henry stepped inside carrying a folder. One glance at Ethan's expression was enough. You finally figured it out. Ethan sighed heavily. Must you always sound so pleased? Only when the solution is obvious. The older advisor placed the folder on the desk. The real question is what you intend to do now. Ethan looked away. Nothing. Henry laughed outright. That is not true. It should be. Perhaps. Henry's smile softened. But it is not. After the advisor departed, Ethan remained alone with thoughts he could no longer avoid. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, Olivia was making a decision of her own. The previous weeks had changed something inside her. At first, she dismissed Ethan's sudden attention as temporary curiosity. Then came the strange questions, the intense stares, the moments when he seemed bothered by things that should not concern him. Yet none of it ever led anywhere meaningful. The Alpha King remained distant whenever conversations became personal. He never explained himself, never apologized for his sharp tone that afternoon in the hallway, never acknowledged how confusing his behavior felt. Gradually, Olivia grew tired of trying to understand it. For her own peace of mind, she decided something needed to change. Distance. That was the answer. Not anger. Not resentment. Distance. If Ethan wanted to treat her like any other member of the staff, then she would stop expecting anything different. The decision seemed simple enough. Yet putting it into practice proved surprisingly difficult. Over the next several days, she became noticeably less available. She still completed every responsibility perfectly. She still remained professional and polite. But she stopped lingering near the royal offices, stopped volunteering for assignments that brought her into Ethan's presence, stopped participating in conversations that extended beyond work. At first, Ethan barely noticed. Then one afternoon, he realized something unsettling. He had not spoken to Olivia in nearly 4 days. The discovery felt absurd. 4 days was not a long time. Yet somehow the palace felt different without those small interactions. The corridors seemed quieter. Meals seemed less enjoyable. Even routine meetings felt strangely empty. One evening, Ethan entered the library expecting to find Olivia organizing records. She was not there. The following morning, he passed through the gardens where she sometimes delivered schedules. Again, nothing. Later, he visited the West Wing. Empty. By the end of the week, frustration had replaced confusion. Have you noticed Olivia avoiding me? He finally asked Henry. The advisor nearly choked on his coffee. Avoiding you? Yes. Henry considered the question carefully. Perhaps she is busy. No, Ethan shook his head immediately. Something changed. The older man studied him for several moments. And why does that bother you? Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Because he knew the answer. The truth arrived with uncomfortable clarity. He missed her. Not simply her work. Not simply her reliability. Her. The conversations. The quiet smiles. The way she noticed details others overlooked. The calm presence she brought into every room. Somehow, during weeks of confusion and jealousy, Olivia had become important. Important enough that her absence now left an unmistakable void. That realization followed Ethan throughout the day. By evening, he found himself standing alone in the palace garden where spring flowers bloomed beneath the fading sunset. The same garden where he often escaped difficult decisions. Yet this challenge felt different from politics or diplomacy. It was personal. For the first time, he considered a possibility that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. What if his jealousy was never really about Nathan? What if Nathan simply forced him to acknowledge something that had been growing quietly for much longer? As golden light disappeared beyond the horizon, Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Somewhere inside the palace, Olivia continued building distance between them. And for the first time, the Alpha King understood exactly how much that distance hurt. The distance continued growing. Day after day, Olivia carried out her duties with the same professionalism she had always shown. Yet something fundamental had changed. She no longer lingered near the royal offices after delivering reports. She no longer stayed behind to exchange casual conversation when meetings ended. Whenever Ethan entered a room, she remained polite, respectful, and efficient. Then she left. At first, Ethan believed he could tolerate it. After all, he was the Alpha King. He managed treaties, disputes, and the affairs of an entire kingdom. Surely he could handle one maid creating a little distance. Yet every passing day proved how wrong he was. The problem was not simply that Olivia was avoiding him. The problem was that her absence had begun affecting parts of his life he never expected. The palace felt quieter, less welcoming. Even routine successes seemed strangely empty. One morning, Ethan received excellent news regarding a trade agreement that would benefit thousands of pack members. Under normal circumstances, he would have felt satisfied. Instead, his first thought was unexpected. Olivia would be happy about this. The realization startled him. More importantly, it revealed how deeply she had become woven into his thoughts. Later that afternoon, he passed through the central courtyard and noticed several servants gathered around a bench. Curious, he slowed his pace. Olivia sat among them holding a basket filled with pastries. Apparently, one of the kitchen workers had celebrated a birthday. Everyone laughed as Olivia handed out treats and listened to stories. Ethan remained partially hidden beneath a stone archway. For several moments, he simply watched. What struck him most was not her smile. It was how naturally people gravitated toward her. Servants, gardeners, cooks, stable workers. Everyone seemed comfortable around her. They trusted her, respected her, enjoyed her company. The scene reminded him of something Henry once said. Leadership begins with character. Looking at Olivia now, Ethan finally understood what that meant. She had no title, no authority, no wealth. Yet people followed her example because kindness created a kind of influence power could never command. As if sensing his presence, Olivia glanced toward the courtyard entrance. Their eyes met briefly. For one hopeful second, Ethan thought she might approach. Instead, she offered a polite nod and returned to her conversation. The disappointment hit harder than he expected. That evening, he sought out Henry. The advisor was organizing documents inside a small office overlooking the gardens. One look at Ethan's expression told him everything. "You finally look worried." Ethan sat heavily in a nearby chair. "I think I made a mistake." Henry nodded. "Several, actually. Thank you for the encouragement." "You are welcome." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I do not understand how things became like this." The older man set aside his papers. "Then perhaps you should start with a simple question." Ethan looked up. "Which question?" Henry's voice softened. "Why does her absence matter so much?" Silence followed. For once, Ethan did not immediately answer. Because the truth was becoming impossible to avoid. He thought about the hallway, the blue dress, the celebration, the jealousy, the growing distance. Every path led toward the same conclusion. Somewhere along the way, Olivia had become far more than a member of the palace staff. She had become someone whose happiness mattered to him, someone whose presence brightened ordinary days, someone whose absence now hurt. The realization arrived slowly but completely. Ethan stared through the office window toward the fading sunset. "Because I care about her." Saying the words aloud changed something. The confusion that had haunted him for weeks suddenly began settling into clarity. Henry smiled faintly. "There it is." Ethan laughed quietly, though there was little humor in the sound. "This is a disaster." "Not necessarily. She is avoiding me." For good reason. Ethan could not argue with that. He remembered the sharp tone in the hallway, the mixed signals, the unanswered questions. From Olivia's perspective, his behavior must have seemed impossible to understand. The more he considered it, the more guilt settled inside him. He had expected her patience while offering very little honesty in return. Night arrived gradually across Silver Moon Palace. Lights illuminated the corridors. Servants completed final tasks before retiring for the evening. Somewhere within those halls, Olivia continued living her life, likely unaware of the realization that had finally reached the Alpha King. standing alone beneath the stars later that night, Ethan accepted a truth he could no longer deny. His jealousy had never been about competition. It had never been about Nathan. The real issue was much simpler and far more terrifying. He had fallen in love with Olivia Carter, and unless he found the courage to tell her, he risked losing the most important person in his life before she ever knew how he truly felt. The realization changed everything, yet it also changed nothing. Ethan still woke before sunrise. He still attended meetings, reviewed reports, and carried the responsibilities of an alpha king. The palace continued functioning exactly as it always had. But beneath the routine, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, he understood the reason behind every confusing emotion of the past few weeks. The jealousy, the frustration, the restlessness whenever Olivia disappeared from sight. It all pointed toward the same truth. He loved her. The problem was that realizing it did not magically solve anything. If anything, it made matters more complicated. Because now he understood exactly how much he had already damaged the situation. Olivia had spent weeks creating distance. Weeks protecting herself from mixed signals and unanswered questions. Ethan could hardly blame her. Looking back, he saw his mistakes clearly. He had expected her attention without earning it. Expected her patience without offering honesty. Expected her to understand feelings he had not even understood himself. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan found himself wandering through the palace gardens. The air carried the scent of spring flowers. Moonlight painted silver patterns across the stone pathways. Normally, he came here to think. Tonight, he came because he knew Olivia often visited the gardens after completing her duties. He told himself the encounter would be accidental. Neither of them would have believed that. As he turned a corner near the rose arbor, he finally saw her. Olivia sat alone on a wooden bench beneath a flowering tree. A book rested in her lap. Soft moonlight illuminated her features. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there. The sight felt strangely peaceful. Then Olivia noticed him. Her expression shifted immediately. Not cold, not angry, merely cautious. The change hurt more than he expected. "Your Majesty." She closed the book and stood politely. Ethan nodded. "Olivia." Silence settled between them. Once, conversations had come easily. Now every word felt important. "Beautiful evening," he finally said. The moment the sentence left his mouth, he hated it. Olivia glanced toward the sky. "It is." Another silence followed. Ethan almost laughed at himself. He had negotiated complex treaties, managed political crises, addressed entire kingdoms. Yet speaking honestly to one woman suddenly felt impossible. Olivia shifted slightly. "Was there something you needed, Your Majesty?" The formal title created distance all by itself. Ethan noticed it immediately. She had always used proper etiquette. Yet lately the words felt colder, more deliberate. "Actually," he said quietly, "there is." Olivia waited patiently. Ethan took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." Genuine surprise crossed her face. "An apology?" "Yes." He looked directly at her. "For the way I spoke to you that afternoon." Olivia understood immediately. The hallway, the dress, the question that had started everything. "You do not need to apologize." "I do." His voice remained firm. "I spoke unfairly." For a moment, neither moved. Then Olivia lowered her eyes. "I did not understand why you were upset." Ethan smiled sadly. "Neither did I." The honesty caught her off guard. She looked back up. For the first time in weeks, the wall between them seemed slightly thinner. "Then why were you upset?" The question arrived gently, not accusatory, simply curious. Ethan's heart immediately accelerated, because now they stood at the edge of the truth. He could continue hiding, continue pretending, or he could finally be honest. Yet before he found the courage to answer, footsteps approached from a nearby path. Nathan Reed appeared carrying several books beneath one arm. The librarian slowed the moment he noticed them. "Your Majesty." Nathan nodded respectfully. "Olivia." Olivia smiled politely. "Good evening." Ethan felt that familiar jealousy stir inside him. Yet this time, something was different. Instead of frustration, clarity remained. Nathan was not the problem. Never had been. The real challenge stood entirely within Ethan himself. Nathan exchanged a few brief words before continuing toward the library wing. The interruption lasted less than a minute. Yet when silence returned, Olivia's expression had changed. She seemed uncertain again, guarded. The fragile moment had passed. "I should finish my reading," she said softly. Ethan nodded. Of course. Olivia offered a respectful smile and walked away beneath the moonlight. Ethan watched until she disappeared beyond the garden path. Strangely, he did not feel defeated, because for the first time, he had taken a step in the right direction. The apology had been real. The honesty had been real. More importantly, he now understood exactly what needed to happen next. If he wanted any chance of earning Olivia's trust again, he would have to stop hiding behind titles, responsibilities, and half-finished conversations. Somewhere ahead waited a truth she deserved to hear. And for the first time, Ethan was finally preparing himself to say it. The days after the garden conversation felt different, not because everything had been resolved. Far from it. The uncertainty still remained. The unanswered feelings still lingered between them. Yet something important had changed. For the first time, Olivia had seen genuine sincerity in Ethan's eyes. The apology had been real. The regret had been real. And despite her best efforts, she found herself thinking about it more often than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Ethan stopped avoiding the truth. Instead of searching for excuses, he finally began examining his own behavior honestly. The conclusion was never pleasant. He had spent weeks expecting Olivia to understand emotions he never communicated. Worse, he had allowed jealousy to influence his actions while offering her no explanation. The more he reflected, the more determined he became to make things right. One afternoon, Henry entered the royal office carrying several documents. Ethan barely glanced at them. "I need your advice." The older advisor immediately looked suspicious. That sentence usually means trouble. Ethan ignored the comment. If someone loses your trust, how do they earn it back? Henry smiled knowingly. By telling the truth. That is all. The truth tends to be more difficult than people expect. Ethan leaned back in his chair. What if the truth changes everything? Henry considered the question carefully. Then perhaps everything needs changing. The answer followed Ethan throughout the rest of the day. By evening, he had reached a decision. No more half-finished conversations. No more uncertainty. Olivia deserved honesty. Complete honesty. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. The following night, the palace hosted a small outdoor gathering celebrating the completion of several community projects. Unlike formal royal events, this occasion felt relaxed and welcoming. Servants, advisors, community leaders, and palace staff attended together. Lanterns illuminated the gardens while musicians performed near the fountain. Olivia arrived shortly after sunset. She wore another simple dress, this one a soft shade of green. Nothing extravagant. Yet Ethan noticed her immediately. Of course he did. Lately, noticing Olivia required no effort at all. For a while, he remained across the garden speaking with guests. Yet his attention continuously drifted toward her. She was helping arrange refreshments, greeting familiar faces, laughing occasionally with friends. The sight filled him with equal parts happiness and nervousness. Eventually, he realized waiting any longer would only make things worse. Gathering his courage, he crossed the garden. Olivia noticed him approaching. Her expression remained calm but curious. "Your Majesty." Ethan smiled slightly. "May we talk?" For a moment she hesitated. Then she nodded. Together they walked away from the crowd toward a quieter section of the gardens. Lantern light reflected softly across nearby flower beds. Music drifted faintly through the evening air. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Ethan stopped near a stone fountain. "I have been unfair to you." Olivia looked surprised. "You already apologized." "Not completely." He met her gaze. "There is more I should have said." She remained silent, allowing him to continue. Ethan took a slow breath. "When I saw you in that blue dress, I reacted badly." A faint smile touched Olivia's lips. That part one noticed. Ethan almost laughed. "I know." The humor faded as seriousness returned. "The truth is that seeing you leave bothered me more than it should have." Olivia studied him carefully. Why? There it was. The question he could no longer avoid. Ethan's heart pounded. Every instinct urged caution. Yet he remembered Henry's advice. "Tell the truth." "Because I was jealous." Olivia blinked. Genuine surprise crossed her face. "Jealous?" Ethan nodded. "At first I did not understand it myself." He looked away briefly before continuing. "Then I saw you spending time with Nathan." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "Nathan?" "Yes." Ethan smiled ruefully. "Which sounds ridiculous now that I say it aloud." For several seconds, Olivia simply stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed. Not mockingly. Not cruelly. Just genuine surprise. The sound instantly eased some of the tension. You were jealous of Nathan? Ethan groaned softly. This conversation is becoming painful. Olivia continued smiling. I never imagined that. Neither had he. Yet now that the truth was finally spoken, relief slowly replaced anxiety. For the first time in weeks, they were talking honestly. No confusion. No assumptions. Just truth. And as the evening breeze moved gently through the garden, Olivia found herself seeing Ethan differently as well. Not as the distant alpha king. Not as the frustrating man who could never explain himself. But as someone standing before her with unusual vulnerability. Someone willing to risk embarrassment because honesty mattered more than pride. And deep inside, she realized that was exactly what she had been waiting to hear. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The laughter faded, leaving behind something warmer. Something quieter. Lantern light shimmered across the fountain, while distant music drifted through the garden. Olivia looked at Ethan differently now. The tension that had surrounded them for weeks was finally beginning to dissolve. Not completely, but enough. You should have told me sooner, she said softly. Ethan released a slow breath. I know. It would have saved both of us a great deal of confusion. I know that too. A faint smile touched her lips. The sight immediately made his chest feel lighter. For weeks, he had been chasing explanations, struggling against emotions he refused to name. Now the truth stood between them, simple and undeniable. Surprisingly, it felt less frightening than silence. Olivia looked down briefly before meeting his gaze again. Do you know what confused me most? Ethan shook his head. You started noticing me only after years of barely noticing me at all. The words carried no bitterness, only honesty. Yet they struck him deeply, because she was right. I have thought about that, he admitted. And Ethan glanced toward the fountain. Reflections danced across the water. The truth is that I noticed you long ago. Olivia looked surprised. You did, just not the way I should have. He smiled sadly. I noticed that things always worked smoothly when you were around. I noticed that people trusted you. I noticed that problems somehow disappeared before reaching my desk. His voice softened. What I failed to notice was you. Silence settled gently around them. Olivia lowered her eyes. The answer clearly affected her more than she expected. That is different, she said quietly. I know. Ethan took a step closer. And I regret it. For several seconds, neither moved. The garden felt strangely still, almost as though the entire world had paused to listen. Then Olivia surprised him. Nathan never made me jealous, you know. Ethan blinked. What? Her smile widened slightly. You seemed very concerned about him. Ethan groaned. Please do not remind me. Olivia laughed again. The sound felt brighter than any music drifting from the celebration. Nathan is my friend. Relief washed through Ethan so quickly that he almost laughed at himself. Weeks of jealousy. Weeks of frustration. All because of assumptions. Henry is never going to let me forget this. Probably not. They stood together beside the fountain, smiling like two people finally learning how to speak honestly. Somewhere nearby, guests continued celebrating. Yet neither seemed eager to return just yet. The conversation felt too important. Eventually, Ethan became serious again. There is one more thing I need to say. Olivia's expression softened. What is it? This time he did not hesitate. No uncertainty. No half-finished explanations. You matter to me. The words settled gently between them. Far more than I realized. Olivia remained silent. Ethan continued anyway. Not because you work in the palace. Not because of your duties. Not because of anything you do for me. He met her gaze completely. You matter because you are you. Emotion flickered across her face. For years, Olivia had devoted herself to helping others, supporting others, encouraging others. Rarely had anyone taken the time to tell her she mattered simply because of who she was. The sincerity in Ethan's voice made it impossible to doubt. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan smiled. You deserve to hear that more often. The evening gradually moved toward its end. Lanterns glowed softly beneath the stars. Palace guests began departing. Yet something important had changed. The distance that once separated them no longer felt impossible. Trust was not rebuilt in a single conversation. Both understood that. But foundations had been laid. Honest ones. Strong ones. As they finally walked back toward the celebration, Olivia glanced at him. You know, most alpha kings probably have more elegant ways of expressing their feelings. Ethan laughed. Unfortunately, You seem to have received this one. I think I can live with that. The answer warmed him more than she realized. Weeks later, life inside Silver Moon Palace continued as always. Meetings happened. Duties remained. Responsibilities never disappeared. Yet beneath the routine, something beautiful had begun growing. Not through grand gestures. Not through dramatic declarations. Through honesty, respect, friendship, and the simple decision to truly see another person. Sometimes Ethan still caught himself smiling whenever Olivia entered a room. Sometimes Olivia still teased him about his jealousy. And every time she did, he accepted it with good humor. Because the memory no longer embarrassed him. It reminded him of an important lesson. The moment he feared losing her was the moment he finally understood how much she meant to him. Under the endless sky above Silver Moon Kingdom, an Alpha King and an Omega Maid discovered that love rarely arrives with perfect timing. Sometimes it begins with confusion. Sometimes it begins with mistakes. But when two hearts finally choose honesty, even the longest journey can lead exactly where it was always meant to go.